In April 1621, 17 Dutch warships anchored off Banda Nera, a volcanic island rising from the Banda Sea. They had come for nutmeg. What they did next killed nearly every person on the islands. The population of the Banda archipelago had stood at approximately 15,000. Within months of the Dutch campaign, the VOC conducted a census. The count of surviving Bandanese was somewhere between 600 and 1,000. The rest were dead, or had fled into the surrounding sea, never to return. The bodies of the Orang Kaya, the merchant headmen who governed the islands, were left where they fell. The people who ran into the jungle interior of Banda Besar were followed. Whole villages were put to fire. But the story does not start there. It starts with something much smaller than a warship. It starts with a seed. The nutmeg fruit looks, when ripe, something like a yellow peach split open. Inside the soft flesh is a hard shell, and inside that shell is the seed. Around the shell, wrapped like a crimson net, is a second spice, mace. Two commodities from a single harvest, on a set of islands that, in the early 17th century, existed nowhere else on Earth. For most of human history, the Banda Islands were the only place in the world where nutmeg grew. The archipelago rises from the Banda Sea in the eastern part of what is now Indonesia. 10 small islands, the largest no bigger than a modest city park, all of them the remnants of ancient volcanoes. Dark, mineral-rich soil, dense jungle on the slopes. The coastlines are shallow coral, difficult to navigate without local knowledge. The total land area of the Banda Islands is roughly equivalent to the city of Washington, D.C. The Bandanese people had lived on these islands for centuries before any European ship arrived. They were not an isolated subsistence community. They were traders. The Orang Kaya, which translates roughly as rich men or merchant headmen, governed the islands not through hereditary kingship, but through a loose council of commercial leaders whose authority derived from their wealth and their relationships with buyers across the Indian Ocean. Javanese merchants came. Arab traders came. Ships from the Malay coast and from Sulawesi came. The Bandanese sold nutmeg to all of them, played their interests against one another, and accumulated enough prosperity that the islands had developed a recognizable merchant culture, with distinct social hierarchies, craft traditions, and a system of customary law governing trade and land use that had evolved over many generations. These were not people waiting to be discovered. They were participants in a trade network that stretched from their small volcanic islands all the way to the markets of Cairo, Venice, and Constantinople. And yet these islands sat at the center of the world's most lucrative trade for 500 years. In medieval Europe, nutmeg was not a spice you put in a holiday recipe. It was medicine, and it was currency. And for a time, it was believed to be a ward against the plague. When the Black Death moved through European cities in the 14th century, physicians and apothecaries who had heard of nutmeg's supposed protective properties found themselves with more demand than the supply chain could meet. Wealthy households burned nutmeg as incense. Merchants carried small amounts as personal protection. The apothecary trade ground it into compounds sold at prices that put it beyond the reach of ordinary people. A small quantity of nutmeg, enough to fill a coat pocket, could cover a laborer's wages for a month. The problem was the root. For centuries, the nutmeg that reached Europe had passed through the hands of Arab merchants in the Indian Ocean, then through the port cities of the Persian Gulf and the Levant, then through the great Italian middlemen of Venice and Genoa. Every hand that touched the supply took a margin. The final price in a northern European city bore almost no relationship to what a Bandanese trader received at the source. When the Ottoman Empire expanded in the 15th century and tightened its control over the overland routes from east to west, European merchants began investing heavily in the search for sea routes that would bypass the middlemen entirely. This is the context in which Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1498. This is why the Portuguese were willing to send ships across oceans no European had charted. They were chasing nutmeg and cloves and pepper, and the fortunes they believed waited at the end of those routes. A single pound of nutmeg carried from the Banda Islands to London or Amsterdam passed through so many hands, paid so many tolls, and crossed so many oceans that by the time it reached a European merchant's shelf, the markup from the price paid at source could exceed 3,000%. Historian Om Prakash, in his study of the VOC's Eastern trade, documented these margins in detail. The spice trade was not supplementary income. For the companies that controlled it, it was the income. The Arab traders who carried nutmeg westward through the Indian Ocean understood this. So did the Javanese merchants who bought it directly from the Bandanese and shipped it to ports across the region. So did the Portuguese navigator Francisco Serrao, who reached the Banda Islands in 1512 and immediately began writing letters to his cousin Ferdinand Magellan, describing what a monopoly over this supply would be worth. The Portuguese tried for a century to hold that monopoly. They built a fort on Banda Neira, they extracted tribute, they killed people who resisted, and still they failed, for a reason that matters. The Bandanese Orang Kaya understood leverage. They sold to the Portuguese when the Portuguese were present. They sold to everyone else when they were not. The islands had more coastline than any Portuguese garrison could watch, and the jungle interior provided cover for boats moving at night. A merchant culture that had spent centuries managing competing buyers was not going to abandon that skill because a new buyer arrived with guns. And then the Dutch arrived. The Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, the Dutch East India Company, received its charter from the Dutch States General in 1602. The VOC was not a trading company in the way that phrase is understood today. It held the legal authority to wage war, sign treaties, build fortresses, coin money, and execute people. It was a government that also happened to sell spices. The States General granted it these powers for a single purpose: to destroy the Portuguese grip on the spice trade and replace it with a Dutch one. The VOC reached the Banda Islands for the first time in 1599. From the beginning, the company demanded exclusive trading agreements. The Orang Kaya refused, or signed under pressure, and continued selling to English and Portuguese ships the moment VOC vessels left the harbor. In May 1609, this resistance produced its first large-scale violence. Admiral Peter Willems Verhoef arranged a meeting with Bandanese leaders to negotiate a new treaty. An ambush during that meeting killed Verhoef. His troops responded by killing a large number of Bandanese and burning villages. The violence was not enough to compel the total submission the VOC wanted. Over the following decade, the pattern repeated. Dutch ships arrived, demanded exclusive contracts, extracted signatures through the threat of blockade, and left. Bandanese traders resumed selling to English ships the moment the Dutch were gone. The English East India Company had established a presence on the island of Run, the westernmost of the Banda Group, in 1603. The Bandanese, facing Dutch monopoly pressure from every direction, had made treaties with the English as a counterweight. A formal agreement signed in 1616 placed Run under English protection, with the Orang Kaya of Run ceding the island to the English crown in exchange for military backing against Dutch pressure. Someone in Amsterdam read the documents recording all of this. Nobody changed the approach. The clock was already ticking. The Bandanese just could not hear it yet. Then came Jan Pieter Zoon Koen. Koen was 31 years old when he was appointed Governor-General of the Dutch East Indies in 1618. He had trained as a merchant's apprentice in Rome, spent years in the VOC's eastern operations, and arrived at a position of total authority with a diagnosis and a prescription already formed. In a letter to the VOC directors, preserved in the Nationaal Archief in The Hague, Koen wrote, Your honors know by experience that trade in Asia cannot be maintained without war, nor war without trade. That sentence is not a metaphor. It is a policy document. It is also a direct statement of what Kuhn intended to do in the Banda Islands. He looked at 15 years of failed monopoly agreements and concluded that the problem was not the agreements. The problem was that the Bandanese remained alive and in possession of their land. A trading people would always find ways to trade. The only solution Cohen could envision was to remove the trading people. Cohen applied to the VOC directors for permission to solve this at scale. The directors in Amsterdam approved the request. They were not uninformed about what they were authorizing. Cohen's letters had made the plan clear. The VOC board, the Heeren 17, had access to decades of field reports describing Bandanese resistance, describing the failed agreements, describing the English presence on run. When they signed the authorization for Cohen's campaign, they understood what a campaign against a civilian population on a chain of small islands would look like. In March 1621, Cohen sailed from Batavia with 19 ships, approximately 1,500 soldiers, and a contingent of Japanese mercenaries. These were ronin, samurai who had found themselves without lords in the aftermath of Japan's long civil conflicts and had taken mercenary work wherever they could find it. The VOC found them effective at close combat and willing to move through difficult terrain. Their role, on arrival, was to enter the jungle interiors of the larger islands and find the people who had fled from the initial coastal attacks. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. The Bandanese defenders numbered perhaps 2,000. They had bows, spears, a small number of firearms, and intimate knowledge of the island's interior. Against 19 warships and 1,500 professional soldiers with cannon, their position was nearly impossible. The geography that had protected them for centuries, the dense jungle, the hidden tracks, the shallow coral coastlines, was now a trap. The Dutch ships could blockade the channels. The ronin could follow people into the forest. The islands were too small to hide in for long. The first Dutch landings on Bandanera in mid-April met resistance that the VOC's firepower suppressed quickly. The initial Bandanese fighters fell back into the hills and jungle of the larger islands. Then the Orang Kaya came forward to negotiate, as they had done before. They understood the formula: concede, sign, survive, wait. What they did not understand was that Cohen had not come for a signature. A meeting was arranged. A group of Bandanese leaders, the Orang Kaya of the main islands, arrived at the Dutch position believing they were attending negotiations. According to VOC records of the campaign, archived in the Nationaal Archief in The Hague, these men were killed. Some accounts place the number who died in this single episode at 44. The Dutch records do not make the precise count easy to establish. What the records confirm is that the killings were deliberate, that the Orang Kaya arrived under terms they believed guaranteed their safety, and that their deaths were the opening signal for the broader campaign. That was only round one. After the Orang Kaya were killed, the Dutch forces and the Japanese mercenaries moved through the Banda Islands in systematic fashion. Villages on Banda Besar, the largest island, were burned. Families who ran into the dense jungle interior were tracked. People who attempted to escape by sea were intercepted by VOC ships patrolling the narrow channels between the islands. Survivors who reached the coast of the neighboring island of Seram faced starvation on unfamiliar ground, with nothing they had carried from their homes. The killing was not fast. The Banda Islands are jungle terrain, ridged with volcanic slopes and dense canopy, and the Dutch forces had to move through it in pursuit of people who knew every path. That required time. The campaign stretched across weeks. VOC logs record the progress of operations on different islands on different dates. Banda Sea was the last and the longest because it was the largest and the most forested. The people who survived longest were the ones who went deepest into the interior. Eventually, there was nowhere else to go, and somehow it gets worse. Historian Willard Hanna, in his detailed study Indonesian Banda, Colonialism and its Aftermath in the Nutmeg Islands, documented what the VOC census records revealed in the months after the campaign. Of a Bandanese population estimated at roughly 15,000 before the Dutch arrived, fewer than 1,000 remained on or near the islands. 15,000 people, fewer than 1,000 left. The orang kaya who walked into that meeting in April 1621 do not have a memorial. We do not know the names of most of them. The VOC recorded them by function, by what treaties they had signed, by what resistance they represented. The families who ran into the jungle of Banda Sea and never came out were not recorded at all. The children of those islands are not in any archive that researchers have been able to access. This was not record-keeping oversight. The VOC did not see a reason to document the names of the people it was removing. That omission is its own kind of violence, and it has endured longer than the campaign itself. If this channel has not appeared in your feed before, subscribe now. This is what we do here, the dark history behind the food we eat without thinking about where it comes from. There is a great deal more of it ahead. While all of this was unfolding in the Banda Sea, something else was developing in a corner of the same colonial world that would, 50 years later, produce one of history's more remarkable diplomatic arrangements. The English East India Company captain Nathaniel Courthope had defended the island of Run against Dutch pressure for 4 years. He had negotiated the 1616 treaty placing Run under English protection, holding the island against VOC blockades and direct military pressure until October 1620, when Dutch sailors ambushed his vessel at sea and killed him. With Courthope dead, Run fell. By the end of Cohen's 1621 campaign, the Dutch controlled every island in the Banda archipelago. The English claim over Run did not disappear, but it became a diplomatic irritant rather than a physical presence. It remained an irritant for 46 years. Then, in 1667, England and the Netherlands signed the Treaty of Breda, resolving a series of colonial conflicts. Under the terms of that treaty, the Dutch ceded their claim to a settlement on the east coast of North America that the English had captured in 1664, a small port town called New Amsterdam, which the English had already renamed New York. In exchange, England formally recognized Dutch sovereignty over Run Island. The Dutch calculated, in 1667, that a nutmeg island in the Banda Sea was worth more than the future site of the world's financial capital. Everything the VOC had built on the islands of Banda was in place. The company just did not know what everything was building toward. The VOC's solution to an island group with almost no remaining Bandanese population was to construct a replacement society from the outside. Dutch settlers called perkeniers were granted parcels of nutmeg groves to manage. The perkeniers received land and contracts obligating them to sell nutmeg exclusively to the VOC at prices the company set. The labor to work those groves came from enslaved people transported from other parts of the Indonesian archipelago, from Sulawesi, from Java, from Timor. The Banda Islands became a plantation economy built entirely on forced labor within a few years of the campaign. The conditions on the Perkin were documented in VOC records and later by travelers who visited the islands. Enslaved workers harvested nutmeg under quotas. Failure to meet the quota carried physical punishment. Workers who ran or resisted faced execution. The heat on the islands during harvest season, when the fruit ripens across the dense groves that cover the slopes of Banda Sea, is significant. The work was continuous during the harvest months. The people doing it had been transported thousands of miles from their homes to labor for the profit of a company that had recently demonstrated, on these same islands, what it was willing to do to anyone who refused its terms. The culture that the Orang Kaya had represented, a trading society built on relationships across the Indian Ocean world, centuries of accumulated knowledge about nutmeg cultivation, the particular social structures of Bandanese governance, the language, the ceremonies, the ways of organizing a community. All of this was dismantled not by neglect, but as a direct consequence of removing the people who carried it. The VOC did not attempt to preserve Bandanese customary law, or record Bandanese oral history, or document the names of the settlements that existed before the campaign. There was no reason to, from the VOC's perspective. The VOC wanted the nutmeg. What became of the people who had grown it for centuries was beside the point. The VOC maintained its nutmeg monopoly through the Banda Islands for nearly 2 centuries. In the 1760s and 1770s, the French botanist Pierre Poivre managed to smuggle nutmeg seedlings out of VOC-controlled territory and establish plantations in Mauritius and other French colonies. When the Dutch discovered that competing nutmeg cultivation was developing elsewhere, their response was to order the destruction of nutmeg trees on islands outside their most tightly controlled perken, so that no external source could erode the monopoly. Trees that had grown for decades were cut down rather than permitted to supply a competitor. The monopoly was the point. It always had been. The Banda Islands are still there. The nutmeg groves are still there. You can buy nutmeg today, grown from descendants of the same trees the VOC was protecting when it reduced a population of 15,000 to fewer than 1,000. What happened in the Banda Islands in 1621 is one of the earliest and most thoroughly documented cases of deliberate colonial population removal in the historical record. Jan Pieterszoon Koen did not stumble into massacre while pursuing a commercial objective. He proposed it, received written authorization from the VOC directors in Amsterdam, and carried it out. The directors who signed those authorizations were calculating the expected return on the investment. The massacre in the Banda Islands was, by the logic of the men who ordered it, a business decision. Koen returned to the Netherlands. He came back to Asia and died in Batavia in 1629 of cholera, before any accounting could be asked of him. The directors who approved his plan lived out their lives in Amsterdam. The Orang Kaya who walked into that April meeting have no monument. The children of Banda Sea in 1621 are not in any archive. The story of the Banda Islands belongs to a pattern that would repeat itself across the centuries of colonial trade. In the Congo under King Leopold, in the rubber forests of the Amazon, in the tea districts of Assam, in the cotton fields built on enslaved labor across the American South. Different commodities, different centuries, different companies. The same logic underneath. Identify what the land produces, determine that the existing inhabitants are an obstacle to controlling it, and act accordingly. The names of the men who make those decisions are preserved in company records and in history books. The names of the people removed are not. There is nutmeg in most kitchens right now. It has been there so long that the question of where it comes from does not typically arise. The Orang Kaya, who controlled the supply of that spice for centuries, are not there anymore. Their names are largely lost. The children of those islands in 1621 have no memorial. The VOC saw no reason to leave one, and the centuries since have not corrected that. That is the history of the spice in your cupboard. If you want to keep following the history that hides inside the food on your table, subscribe to this channel. And if there is a crop, a famine, an ingredient, a trade war, a commodity that built or broke a civilization, leave it in the comments. We have a long list. We are just getting started.